What if I told you that in the bitter spring of 1922, upon a lonely Bavarian farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, a family of 6, Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, her children, and the maid, were slaughtered in the cold silence of night. Their bodies left beneath hay in the barn? And what if I told you that the whispers never ceased, because the killer may have lived inside their walls, breathing their air, watching their every step, until the final stroke fell? Before we peel back the rotting boards of this legend, let your presence be known. Subscribe, and step with us into the shadows where history drips with blood and silence. Only the brave should follow. The year was 1922, and Bavaria lay beneath a shroud of ice and silence. Hinterkaifeck stood apart from the world, a lonely farmstead crouched between the skeletal trees, its roof hunched beneath snow that gleamed white by day and silver by night. To approach it was to step into exile, a place where the wind clawed at your bones and the earth seemed to sigh beneath your feet. Andreas Gruber, a man hardened into stone by cruelty and suspicion, moved through that snow with the gait of one who believed himself master of both land and bloodline. Yet even his heavy boots could not drown the whispers that stirred across the yard. The house was alive, in ways no farm should be. The boards moaned, not with the weight of winter, but with something restless inside. A key vanished from its hook by the door. Doors stood unlocked when Andreas swore he had sealed them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed above the bedrooms, pressing against the ceiling like hands through thin cloth. His wife, Cecilia, pale as the frost outside, muttered of shadows that slid across the windows when the night was deep. Victoria, their daughter, spoke to the priest of eyes that watched her when she thought herself alone. But the words fell into silence, as all words seemed to do at Hinterkaifeck. Months earlier, the maid had fled, abandoning her duties in terror. She spoke of hearing voices whispering in the rafters, of feeling a breath across her neck in rooms where no one stood. The family mocked her weakness, yet her absence became a wound. Into that wound, another maid was brought, young, hopeful, but destined to meet her end within days of her arrival. She crossed the threshold with suitcase in hand, unaware she was stepping into a house already marked for death. The animals felt it too. The cows bawled through the nights as though answering invisible commands, the dog barked and whined at the corners of the barn, and the horses stamped nervously, eyes rolling white. Snow muffled the sounds of the world, yet inside Hinterkaifeck, the silence had weight. A silence that pressed against the lungs. Thick as smoke, waiting for release, Andreas, for all his iron will, felt the hair rise along his neck as he trudged the yard one bitter evening. His eyes narrowed against the wind, scanning the endless white fields. Then he saw them. Footprints, deep, clear, undeniable. They led from the woods across the yard and straight to the farmhouse door. But there were no tracks leading back. The snow swallowed all answers, leaving only the trail of an arrival with no departure. The family huddled inside that night, their fire burning low, each ear straining against the storm for the sound of an intruder's breath. Yet no door opened, no glass shattered, and still, footsteps creaked in the attic above. In the marrow of Hinterkaifeck, the walls had already welcomed someone home. Andreas Gruber was not merely a farmer. He was a tyrant in wool and frost. His face bore the map of his cruelty, every wrinkle carved by the weight of domination. Neighbors described him as a man who rarely smiled, whose words cut deeper than the blades he sharpened in the barn. Within his own walls, his hand fell heavier still. His wife, Cecilia, bent beneath his shadow, frail and silent. His daughter, Victoria, bore shame whispered behind doors, shame of a father who had crossed boundaries that no blood should stain. And yet she endured, because hunger and circumstance bound her tighter than rope. At the dinner table, silence was their prayer. The crack of utensils against porcelain was louder than laughter, for laughter had no place here. Andreas's glare kept his children rigid, his wife trembling, his daughter pale. Even the grandchildren felt the chill of his rule, their play smothered like fire beneath wet ash. Victoria's voice, clear and gentle, was often silenced by his bark, her song choked before it could reach the rafters. She longed for freedom, yet freedom was not a word that survived long at Hinterkaifeck. Outside those walls, the villagers felt no warmth from him either. He quarreled with neighbors over land, over fences, over the smallest slights. His enemies grew like weeds, and though their resentment burned quietly, it was no secret that Andreas had few allies. Men muttered in taverns, women whispered over washtubs. Some said he was cursed, others that his cruelty invited curses. The village priest turned his eyes away from the darkness on the Gruber farm, unwilling to face the festering rot he sensed beneath its roof. Still, Andreas carried himself as master, as though his stubbornness could hold back both nature and fate. Storms lashed against the walls, yet he ordered his family to labor through cold that made their hands raw. He prized obedience above love, fear above affection. His iron will forged silence in every room, silence that became the very air they breathed. But silence cannot shield a man from shadows. For weeks the walls had whispered with strange sounds, and still Andreas refused to bow to fear. He mocked the idea of intruders, dismissed the vanishing keys, the unexplained noises in the attic. Yet deep in the night, when he believed no one was watching, even Andreas's eyes flickered toward the rafters. The iron hand that had ruled his family was beginning to tremble, if only for a moment. On the final March evening, he walked through the yard, frost crunching beneath his boots, muttering to himself of footprints that should not exist. The snow reflected his lantern light like shards of broken glass, and the barn loomed ahead like a waiting coffin. He was not a man who feared storms, nor whispers, nor death itself. But when he opened that barn door, the shadows within seemed to swallow the light whole. Andreas Gruber had made enemies of all who knew him. Soon, one of them, or perhaps something darker, would answer his tyranny with an axe. The days that followed were heavy with unease, each hour stitched together by silence and dread. Hinterkaifeck was no ordinary farmstead. It had become a stage where invisible actors moved above the living, rehearsing terror step by step. The house breathed with them. At night, when the wind rattled the shutters and snow hissed against the windows, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps drifted from the attic. Each creak of timber was a pulse of fear that no one could still. Keys vanished from their hooks, though Andreas swore he never misplaced them. A newspaper appeared on the kitchen table, a publication no one in the house had purchased. The family argued quietly, accusing one another, but their whispers always ended in silence, for the truth felt heavier than accusation. Casilia, weary and frail, swore she felt a gaze upon her, watching from cracks in the wood. Victoria confessed to the priest that she heard whispers outside her window at night, words drowned by the wind. He dismissed it as exhaustion, though even he could not look her in the eye as he said so. The animals felt it too. The cows lowed through the night, restless and uneasy. The horses stamped and shivered, their eyes rolling white, refusing to calm. Even the chickens, usually a chorus of clucks and fluttering, fell silent at once, as though obeying a command whispered only to them. The dog barked at corners of the barn where no figure stood, his hackles raised, his growls trembling as though he sensed the unseen. The new maid, Maria, had barely begun to settle into her quarters when fear took root. She lay awake in the small hours, staring into the dark, every nerve straining at the sound of faint movements overhead. Her breath caught when dust sifted down from the rafters, stirred by something or someone walking just above. She considered fleeing as her predecessor had done, but poverty chained her. She needed the work, no matter how heavy the dread pressing against her chest. One storm-lashed night, the family searched the farm with lanterns held high. The snow blew in sharp needles against their faces as they circled the barn, the house, the fields. Their lights swung through shadows, their breaths fogged in the air. Yet they found nothing. No intruder, no answer. Only the storm howling back at them, mocking their fear. Still, the noises persisted. The attic groaned. Boards shifted. Whispers rode the silence. Victoria pressed her children close as they slept, her hand trembling as she stroked their hair, her lips moving in prayer. The air was thick with waiting, as if the house itself held its breath. And then, in the snow outside, new footprints appeared. They trailed from the edge of the woods, crossed the yard, and stopped at the farmhouse door. But there were no tracks leading away. The attic kept its secrets. The walls kept their silence. And the family, trapped in their own home, could no longer tell whether they lived among ghosts or a man of flesh and hunger who refused to leave. The night of March 31st, 1922, arrived cloaked in wind and silence, a silence so deep it seemed the earth itself had stopped breathing. Hinterkaifeck stood against the black sky like a solitary tomb, its walls trembling under the weight of what was to come. Within its rooms, the family lived their final hours unaware, or perhaps unwilling to face, that shadows had already chosen their grave. It began in the barn. Perhaps it was a sound that lured Andreas first, a cow's restless lowing or a rustle too heavy to be straw alone. Lantern in hand, he crossed the snow-drenched yard, each step sinking into white oblivion. The barn door groaned as he forced it open, lantern light spilling across walls lined with tools and rafters hunched like watching shoulders. He took a single step inside, and then the first blow fell. The axe struck with a sound more final than thunder, splitting flesh and bone, silencing him forever. Casilia, his wife, soon followed. Drawn by the absence of her husband, she entered the barn, her breath puffing pale in the cold, her frame slight and weary. She did not have time to cry out. A second strike ended her years of quiet suffering, her body crumpling beside the man who had ruled her life. Victoria came next. Stronger, more spirited, she had always borne her father's weight with clenched jaw and hidden grief. She entered searching, perhaps calling for her parents. Her scream split the night, but only once. The axe silenced her, though her eyes remained wide, glassy with horror that would not fade. Last came little Casilia, the young girl, her small voice piercing the barn with cries for her mother. The killer's hand hesitated, if only for a second, before swinging. Her skull shattered, yet her struggle was fierce. Strands of her hair tore in her clenched fists, a final act of resistance against the hand that condemned her. Her tiny body slumped into the straw, her blood soaking into the hay as though the earth itself were drinking deeply. One by one, their bodies were dragged together, covered with straw in grotesque mockery of burial. The lantern guttered, shadows leapt against the walls, and silence reclaimed the barn. The animals shifted uneasily, their breath steaming in the cold, their eyes fixed on the darkness where life had just been stolen. But the night was not done. In the farmhouse, warmth still glowed from the hearth. The maid Maria and the youngest child, Joseph, breathed the air of the living, unaware that death had already crossed their threshold. The killer's work was only half complete. The barn now held silence and decay, but the house, the house still lived, and soon its laughter, its cries, its lullabies too would be choked into silence. The axe had not yet cooled. The barn lay heavy with silence, its straw matted dark, its rafters sagging beneath unseen weight. Yet only yards away, within the farmhouse walls, life still flickered. A small fire hissed in the hearth, casting faint light across rooms where the youngest voices had not yet been stilled. Maria, the new maid, unpacked her meager belongings, her hands trembling, though she could not say why. Little Joseph, Victoria's child, slept soundly in his crib, his breath soft, his innocence unguarded. But outside, death waited with blood still warm on its hands. The killer crossed the threshold with deliberate steps, as though the house already belonged to him. No one heard the door. No one stirred as shadows lengthened. Maria's fear, long simmering, became prophecy fulfilled. She barely had time to rise from her bed before the axe descended, her cry smothered into silence. Her blood mingled with the boards beneath her feet. The final defiance of a woman who had sensed the evil from the moment she arrived. Then, there was Joseph, a child no more than 2, his cheeks round, his eyes closed in dreams unspoiled by cruelty. He did not know the world he had been born into, nor the sins that tangled his bloodline. The killer stood above the crib, watching. The fire crackled faintly, a cruel echo of warmth in a house already claimed by the cold. The axe fell swiftly, a single merciless stroke. The boy's life ended before it had truly begun, his body left small and fragile, swallowed by the silence. And then, the strangest horror of all, the killer did not flee. He did not vanish into the snow, nor leave the house abandoned to decay. He lingered. He tended the farm as though nothing had happened. He fed the cattle, their lowing breaking the stillness of the night. He milked them in the mornings, his hand steady, his routine precise. He ate their bread, their meat, their preserves, chewing in silence while the corpses rotted yards away. The hearth was kept alive, wood crackling as though a family still lived here. To passing eyes, Hinterkaifeck still breathed with ordinary life. For days, the farm persisted under this grim illusion. Neighbors saw smoke curling from the chimney, heard animals tended to, and thought little of it. Yet unanswered letters piled, children remained absent from school, and church pews held only empty space where the Grubers once sat. Time decayed, and with it the bodies. The barn grew ripe with the stench of iron and rot, while within the farmhouse, silence pressed against every wall, a silence that screamed without sound. Who was this figure who could live among the dead? To feed himself at the table where prayers once whispered, to sleep in the rooms where terror had clung to the rafters? He was no thief fleeing with plunder, no wanderer passing through. He wanted to remain, to wear the skin of their lives, to inhabit the emptiness he had carved with his own hand. The hearth glowed. The animals were tended, but within the walls, death hung like a storm cloud waiting to break. And beyond the fields, the village was beginning to wonder. The days stretched into nearly a week before suspicion outweighed silence. In the village, tongues began to stir. Victoria had not appeared at choir. Young Cecilia was absent from school, and Josef's laughter no longer drifted from the Gruber farm. Neighbors knocked at Hinterkaifeck's door, but no answer came. Still, smoke rose from the chimney. The animals were fed. It was as if the family had vanished, yet the farm continued to breathe without them. At last, a small group of men crossed the frost-bitten fields, their boots sinking deep into the thawing snow. The farm greeted them in stillness. The dog barked sharply, tethered and restless, its cries echoing against the barn. The men exchanged uneasy glances as they approached the wide wooden doors, the hinges creaking in protest when they forced them open. The stench hit them first, sweet, metallic, suffocating. Flies hummed, though the air was still cold. And then, beneath the hay, they saw the truth. One body, then another, 4 in all, stacked grotesquely as though hidden in shame, their skulls split wide, their faces mangled beyond recognition. Andreas's frame lay broken, Cecilia's small body stiff with pain, Victoria's beauty marred by horror, and young Cecilia's hand still clutching strands of her own torn hair. Men recoiled, some gagging, others retreating into prayer. One fell to his knees, his eyes wide with disbelief. The barn seemed to sigh around them, its timbers moaning with the weight of blood and silence. No storm outside could rival the storm now roaring in their hearts. But the horror was not confined to the barn. Searching the farmhouse, they found Maria sprawled lifeless, her body stilled by the axe, her belongings never unpacked. Then Josef, the smallest, the most innocent, struck down in his crib, as though mercy had been banished from the earth. Yet what unnerved them most was not only the death, but the life that lingered. The hearth still smoldered, embers glowing faintly as if stoked only hours before. Bread had been cut, meat had been eaten. The animals, though restless, had been cared for. Someone had lived here in the aftermath, moving through rooms as though they belonged, stepping over corpses to sit at the table of the dead. The men fled from room to room, their lanterns trembling, their breaths quickened. They searched for the intruder, for some trace of the killer. But every corner, every shadow, yielded only silence. The walls pressed close, the attic groaned faintly above, and suspicion festered in their bones. Was it a neighbor who knew the farm too well? A drifter drawn by hunger and madness? Or had the family been slaughtered by someone who had lived with them, unseen, for weeks, even months? No answer lay in the blood-stained straw, nor in the hollow eyes of the dead. The discovery was only the beginning. The village would never again sleep soundly, for Hinterkaifeck had revealed itself as more than a farm. It was a wound, festering with questions that would never heal. And somewhere in the silence above, the rafters seemed to creak, as though someone, or something, still lingered unseen. The days after the discovery unfolded like a funeral without end. Villagers swarmed the farm, their faces pale, their eyes darting toward shadows, each afraid the killer still lurked within arm's reach. The priest muttered prayers over the dead, but his voice wavered, as though even heaven itself refused to listen. Police from Munich arrived, their boots heavy on the farmhouse floors, their questions spilling like storm water into soil already drenched with dread. Yet no answer rose to meet them. Every clue dissolved in contradiction, every suspicion curdled into silence. The farm became a theater of decay. Children were warned away from its borders, yet they whispered among themselves of the Gruber's ghosts, wandering through the snow with split skulls and hollow eyes. Men spat when they passed, muttering that the ground itself was cursed, that no seed planted here would ever grow straight again. The walls of Hinterkaifeck seemed to hold their breath, as though mocking every attempt to uncover their secrets. In time, the bodies were laid to rest, but peace never followed. Neighbors spoke of how the dog still barked at night, long after the corpses had been carried away. Others swore they saw lights flicker in the attic, or heard boards creak where no living step should fall. Fear clung to the land like frost that would not melt. Eventually, Hinterkaifeck was torn down. Its beams were chopped, its stones scattered, its roof burned to ash. But destruction could not banish memory. The soil remained heavy, soaked in blood that time could not wash clean. Photographs survived, haunting images of broken skulls, crime reports inked with confusion, testimonies trembling with fear. These scraps became relics, carried forward like bones dug from a grave. And still, the question lingered. Who was the hand that ended 6 lives? Was it Andreas's enemies, countless and silent? Victoria's forbidden lover, bound by scandal and rage? Or was it a shadow that required no name, a phantom who found home within the rafters and silence of Hinterkaifeck? No trial was ever held, no confession was ever heard. The killer dissolved into smoke, leaving only myth behind. Generations later, the whispers endure. Farmers crossing the fields pause at dusk, swearing they hear footsteps crunching snow, though no one walks beside them. Children speak of the attic that no longer exists, a hollow above their dreams where someone waits, listening. The ruins are gone, but the legend breathes still, restless and unresolved. Hinterkaifeck's soil bears no crops, only silence. Its memory clings to Germany's marrow like frost to bone, a story retold not to end, but to haunt. And so the tale lingers, smoke upon stone, whispers in snow, blood in straw, unanswered, eternal. For some say that in the dead of winter, when the wind crawls low across the fields, you can still hear footsteps in the attic of a house that no longer stands.